Hello and welcome to the Chatterbox Letters podcast. Today I will be doing another special presentation. I will be reading my second self-published book, my sequel to the Minorities, the pilot. I will be reading to everyone the Minorities, Richard's Indiscretions, Chapter 6. I hope everyone will enjoy my sequel while I read to everyone the Minorities, Richard's Indiscretions. This is also a huge chatter letter. All right, let's get busy here. Chapter 6, The Beginning of Grace and Prosperity. 3 weeks after Richard's funeral, Sarah was finally at peace with herself after 2 long years of living with the aftermath of her brutal attack. Sarah began her day with Paul Robert as she took the first walk of life out on the outside of her home, never to live in constant fear with the haunting of Richard's reign of terror against her, or of any of his accomplices lurking around town, assassinating and terrorizing innocent people under his command, since they were all in prison with life sentences. Sarah felt the sense of security and peace as she walked freely on the outside of her home. Sarah and Paul Robert began their journey to the Wilkinsons' household for a visit with Emily. She was met by her friends en route to the Wilkinsons. Annie, Molly, Phoebe, and Denise joined Sarah for the visit with Emily. Denise noticed Sarah's happiness for the first time in 2 years after her ordeal. "I see a very happy young woman for the first time in ages, so, Sarah. What have you been up to since Richard's funeral?" "Putting my life back together, Denise, trying to cope with all the havoc I've been through for the last 2 years. I finally found peace, and I really thank God for bringing me through those tough times in my life where I thought I was going to go crazy because of Richard's plot of revenge against me." All right, next page. "I'm glad it's all over. Annie, you better thank God that you were not a part of what happened during the events of Richard's reign of terror. You and Phoebe both. Even Molly, since you knew about it from the media and through his trial, when it was a case nothing could not compare to the horror Richard put everyone through." The girls walked freely on their journey to the Wilkinsons without uttering another word or a phrase about what was in the past. Richard and his reign of terror was part of that past gone forever, never to be seen or felt again for all eternity. Within minutes, the girls arrived at the Wilkinsons' household, where Emily and Daniel were sitting outside on the porch, enjoying the sunshine and the free air and the insulting each other as normal brothers and sisters would do when they love one another unconditionally. Instead of visiting with the girls, Daniel decides to walk over to his friend Reginald's house. As the girls approached the front door, Emily was sitting. Annie adored the fresh air and sunshine, a typical day of freedom without despair lingering its ugly head against humanity. "I tell you, this is going to be a great day, girl. We need to do something something special, something worthwhile. What do you think, baby? Maybe we should pack a picnic lunch and all of us go out to the park. What do you say about that, Molly? That seems cool. It's a beautiful day to do so. How about you, Denise? I look forward to it. What do you think, Sarah? I totally agree. I want to sit with Paul Robert and enjoy the day in peace without the entire group of friends, with my entire group of friends in attendance on the day of peace with an entire group of friends on a wonderful picnic. What about Emily? Oh, I forgot. How are you today? I'm great. I would love to do today with all my heart wonderful friends. I'll go in and tell Mama. Moments after preparing the picnic lunch at the Wilkersons, the girls set off to the local park where they set up the picnic lunch under the biggest oak tree ever stood. Phoebe covered the table with the tablecloth. Annie and Molly set the table with plates, napkins, and plastic utensils. Denise and Emily prepared the food and beverage. Sarah prepared Paul Roberts' place setting with his booster seat, secure, intact, the sturdy picnic bench. They were all ready to be served. Emily was grateful to see Sarah happy, as Annie stated earlier, before they set out for the private picnic lunch. I'm so happy to see you happy, Sarah. And to look at Paul Robert over there, he seems happy too. Emily, me, and Paul Robert were bursting with joy right now. Then out of the blue, two familiar faces came out of the woodwork in the park. Luther Rollins and Kevin Osborne came over to the girls without any threats or harm towards them. They came in peace. Sarah, Denise, and Emily remembered the two boys had saved Sarah's life when they gave up Richard to the state. Luther was the first to speak out to Sarah after a month when their families were taken into protective custody by the state. Sarah and the girls invited Luther and Kevin to their picnic lunch. The boys was grateful to the girls for inviting them to sit down and enjoy the day with them at their picnic lunch. Do you remember me? I am Luther. Sarah, how are you doing? I mean, really. I'm doing great, Luther. Never been better. Today is a great day for just being around the ones you love and having a great time. Kevin, how are you doing? I'm holding Sarah. I think I'll be all right after what we've been through. Come, Luther. Kevin, sit down with us for lunch. Luther and Kevin sat down and ate lunch with the girls. The healing process began as everyone laughed and talked about things out of the ordinary. Happy things that did not remind them of their past or of Richard's reign of terror against them. Kevin took Paul Robert and held him in his arms, talking the language, running around and playing around with him. Sarah watched Kevin become attached to Paul Robert. She and the girls and Luther watched Kevin as he played with Paul Robert. The day of rearing to the end, Luther and Kevin decided to walk along with the girls on their way home. Kevin continued to play with Paul Robert. Next page. It seemed like Paul Robert is having fun playing with you, Kevin. He's becoming attached to you already. I don't get the whole lot of people when it comes to Paul Robert. I consider myself natural with kids, Sarah. I think Paul Robert liked me very much. I think so too. Sarah gave thanks to the Lord for being alive and to the boys for saving her life. Thank you, Jesus, for bringing me through some rough times. Thanks once again, Kevin. Luther for saving my life. The boys welcomed Sarah with an open arms as they both embraced her and Paul Robert with love and understanding from their ordeal with Richard. It was to be a new beginning of grace and prosperity for everyone who suffered by the hands or the terror of Richard Morris. It was in full-fledged summer. It was 1 month from the day Richard's burial. Everyone lives seemed to be completely back to normal. It was in the middle of the afternoon at the Shelton's house. It was the day of Annie's pick out your own pajama gathering for her big pajama party that was to be held within 3 weeks from the last day of the school year. Sarah, Emily, Denise, Phoebe, and Molly were in attendance. They were all in Annie's room pulling out of her closet and tons of pajamas that Annie collected over the years. Beautiful satins, cottons, and silks. Every kind of pajama that fit every girl's needs and their figures. Sarah was amazed at the assortment of pajamas Annie had. Wow, Annie, where did you get all these nice pajamas? Oh, all sorts of lingerie stores at the mall, out of town when me and my parents were on vacation and other places. Annie's mother, Linda Shelton, joined in on the gathering with the girls. She observed Annie's collection of pajamas. Sarah was the first to pick out and try on the cotton pair she admired. This is swank, Annie. The pajamas are off the chain. You look very good in them, if I do say so myself, Sarah. Annie's mother and the girls laughed and talked about everything throughout the afternoon, about their picks from the pile of different fabrics and color of pajamas. After the gathering ended, the girls hung out downstairs in the living room while Linda made dinner. They talked about things that we're going to do when school ended for the summer break and after the big pajama party. They talked about hitting up the beaches, meeting new people, and just having fun. Annie quickly decided on location where every means of having fun would be the ultimate playground. I think I got it. Right after the big pajama party, let us spend our summer at one of the most popular beaches in Florida. Phoebe was not familiar with the beaches in Florida, even though she had never been to Florida to experience some of the lush beaches that the state of Florida had to offer for summer fun. Which beach do you prefer, Annie? Daytona Beach, Phoebe. Oh, I heard of it. It's one of the most popular beaches in Florida, besides Miami Beach, I guess. Linda brought out some refreshment for the girls, lemonade and freshly baked sugar cookies. Linda overheard the girls talking about the beaches of Florida. She gave her input about the girls' potential plans to the beaches of Florida after the big pajama party. I overheard you and the girls talking about going to Florida. Annie, where are you going to get the money to go to Florida? Mom, I'll earn the money. I will get a summer job. I will do it, Mom, along with Chevro girls. Mom, we are not babying you. No, you are my daughter. Do you realize how the world is these days, Annie? Remember that guy Richard? Everyone was silent when Richard's name was mentioned. Linda realized the possible outcome of the girl's attitude towards her when Richard's name is mentioned. Oh, Sarah, I'm sorry for mentioning Richard's name. No problem, Miss Shelton. I'm pretty much over him now. Don't worry. Okay, girls, I think I need to go back downstairs to my kitchen duties. Next page. Linda placed a snack tray on the coffee table in the living room. She returned into the kitchen to finish preparing dinner. Annie and the girls continued their conversation about their trip to the beaches of Florida. Molly picked up a full brochure on the coffee table. She briefly looked through the brochure at many exotic beaches of the world. Oh my God, look at these. This is beautiful. Annie, is there any brochures of Florida beaches? Not at this moment, Molly. Annie and the girls planned their trip to Florida. They finished their lemonade and freshly baked sugar cookies before they decided to plan the trip. 1 hour later, after planning their Florida trip, the girls left Annie Shelton's home. Their decisions were made up about the Florida trip. They were final. Linda and Annie decided to have a mother and daughter talk about the Florida trip. Annie, you know I didn't agree to this trip you and the girls are planning. What about your dad? Mom, I really want to do this. Me and the girls, we don't get chances like this. Annie, I'm just afraid of what will happen on that trip. You got perverts, people that are psychotic, sexual predators and offenders, people like aching to get girls like you. Maybe you should have a chaperone for a change. Just to be safe, Annie. You're right, Mom. I need to tell the girls about a chaperone. Believe me, they will be disappointed. I know, Annie, but it's for the best. Maybe we should ask your father about this Florida trip. Okay, Mom. Annie's dad, Steve Shelton, entered the house through the back door. Annie was greeted warmly by her dad spontaneously as she and her mother finished their conversation about the trip to Florida. Annie was hesitant to tell her father about the trip to Florida. She decided to put it on a brief hold of telling him about the trip until she was ready. Steve noticed that Linda was concerned about their daughter and what they was conversing about just before he walked in the door. Linda, is everything okay with you and Annie? I noticed when I walked in the door that you and Annie were talking about something. I'll let Annie tell you, Steve. Mom, I was not ready to tell Dad yet. Annie was still hesitant to disclose to her father of the trip to Florida. She quickly exited the kitchen upstairs to her bedroom. The telephone rang. Steve picks up. Phoebe was on the phone. Annie, you friend Phoebe is on the telephone. Okay, Dad. Annie picked up the telephone. She relayed what her mother said about the trip of being chaperoned. You won't believe it, Phoebe. What, Annie? Mom is going to have our trip chaperoned. I have not told my dad about this trip. What I'm supposed to do right now, Phoebe. Chaperone? Are you kidding me, Annie? My mom says it's for our own safety, and she's right, Phoebe. I guess so. Oh well. Why haven't you said anything to your father, Annie? I'm afraid of what he would say or what he may think. I think you need to tell him just to see what he might say. Maybe he'll say yes, Annie. I guess. Maybe he will. I guess I got to go, Phoebe. See you later. Bye. The girls hung up. Steve and Linda came upstairs to Annie's bedroom to talk to her about the Florida trip. Linda had informed Steve about the Florida trip without Annie's consent for her to tell her father about the trip on her own. Annie was upset about the fact that her mother told her father about the trip before she could tell him. Annie, your mother told me about Florida. Annie looked over at her mother. She was completely angry for what her mother had done. Annie turned her back towards her parents and laid onto her pillow. And she immediately turned back towards the mother and was determined to find out why her mother did what she did without her consent to tell her father on her own terms. All right, next page. Why, Mom? Why did you tell my dad? I was going to tell him about the Florida trip. I didn't need your help with this, Mom. I'm sorry, Annie. I felt the need to tell him about it. You're our daughter, Annie. You make this big decision without our knowledge of this magnitude is extremely unsound-minded of you. Unsound-minded? Dad, will you please let me go to Florida? I did not want to tell you at first, but I was going to wait until a little later. I was going to tell you, Dad, about the trip to Florida. Annie, where are you going to get the money for this trip you're talking about? Dad, I'm going to earn it, all of us girls. Who are going to on this trip that you planned? Emily's going. It's all right with her parents. Denise is going. Sarah and Paul Robert are going. Molly is going, and Phoebe is going too. And myself, Dad. What about a chaperone? If I may decide that you're going, Annie. Oh, Dad, that's what I talked about with Phoebe tonight. She said that Paul Langston would chaperone the trip. Your mother and I will think on this and we'll give you an answer later on tomorrow morning. Good night, Annie. Good night. Annie turned over in her bed onto her back towards her parents as they left the bedroom, turning off the light to darkness. Annie was completely angry with her mother for telling her dad about the Florida trip. Annie got down on her knees to pray for her outburst to her mother and anger towards her. Lord, forgive me for my sins. Forgive me for my outburst towards my mother. I did not mean what I did towards her. She did not deserve that coming from me, Lord. Help me to control my anger. Sometimes I go overboard with it. I am sorry. Please forgive me, Lord, for my outburst earlier as she mentioned Richard's name. She was just giving me and my friend's point of view. Thanks for many blessings in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Annie returned to her bed and slept through the night without a sound or a word about the trip to the beaches of Florida, or ever thought of being angry with her mother. She patiently decided to wait on her father's response about the trip. It was the next morning after Steve and Linda's talk with Annie about the trip to the beaches of Florida. Annie awakened to a typical morning. She began to wonder about her father's final answer to her question that she patiently waited for. She decided to prepare for the worst just in case her father said no to her trip. 5 minutes after her beauty ritual, Annie was ready for breakfast and her father's final answer to her question about the trip to the beaches of Florida. Annie came downstairs for breakfast. She approached her father in response of his final answer. "Good morning, Dad." Annie patiently waited for her dad's response to her question. While she waited, she prepared her breakfast. Steve decided now was the time to tell Annie his answer to her question she asked the night before. "Annie, I've decided to let you go with your friends to Florida, since Sarah's father, Paul, will be your chaperone. Then I'll say it's okay with me. I will furnish the money for your trip." Annie was extremely excited about her father's response. She did not hesitate to show her excitement towards her father. She immediately embraced him with all her might and with all her heart. "Dad, oh my God, do you really mean it? I can go to Florida?" "Yes, my angel. You will be going to Florida with your friends, thanks to Paul Langston for being your chaperone." "I will never forget this, Dad. I promise I will never forget this." Annie ran upstairs to call her friends to relay the good news about her father's response about the trip to the beaches of Florida. Annie called Sarah and told her the good news. "Sarah, you won't believe my father said it's all right. I'm going to Florida and he's going to fund my trip there, thanks to Sarah's father." Let's go to the next page. "That's great, Annie. I will call the other girls and give them the good news. I'm extremely excited, Annie. I'll talk with you tomorrow. Bye." Annie screamed with excitement about the trip. She could not believe her dad made the decision to let her travel such long way away from home with a chaperone, of course. Annie came back downstairs and embraced her father one more for giving her the best news she could ever receive from her father. Annie sat down at breakfast table and finished her breakfast with her dad. Linda came up to Annie and embraced her without a word. She wanted to share in Annie's happiness about her potential trip to the beaches of Florida. Annie pulled away from her mother for a brief second to respond to her that night before when she was upset. Mom, I am so sorry for the way I acted towards you earlier yesterday afternoon, that last night before I went to bed. I am so sorry for my rudeness. I pray to Lord about my attitude and for him to forgive me for my outburst, Mom. Will you forgive me? You've already been forgiven. I love you, Annie. I love you too, Mom. I should apologize for mentioning Richard's name yesterday when you and the girls was having a pajama gathering. I know how much pain he caused when he was alive, at least. That's what I heard. Mom, no problem about that. Sarah been over him since the funeral. There is no problem with mentioning him. He cannot hurt anyone else again. I mean, I am not trying to make him out to be the worst person in the world. It was just because he had a lot of fear and chaos, and now he is dead. Richard cannot hurt any of us again. I really feel for his parents right now. What were their names? Their names was Eddie and Charlotte Morris. Oh, God bless them. Linda and her daughter Annie joined forces once again as mother and daughter. Annie was grateful to her mother as God intended for them to be. Steve came up to Linda and Annie and embraced them in his arms as tightly as he could, closing the bond and their sharing of a lovely family. That was chapter 6, and I'm very thankful for reading chapter 6, the beginning of grace and prosperity. It's also a powerful chapter that I read to everyone. And as of right now, I want everyone to like, share, subscribe to my podcast. Hit that notification button to know when I go live. Ring that bell for updates on my podcast. And everyone, if you have a chatter letter you would like to send to me, please send your chatter letter with anything you want to write about. Anything, as long as you keep it clean, write your letters clear and discreet. Send your chatter letter to the Chatterbox Letters Podcast, Post Office Box 5556, Lakeland, Florida 33807. And I would like everyone, please do not hesitate to send me your chatter letter. Please procrastinate and send me your letter today.